So some of the first very initial text messages I received were asking me to come to campus for a visit. And that can feel a little sales driven, a little pushy right away, especially for seniors who had just started their. I had just inquired for the first time. I would hope that maybe I'd get a couple of text messages first or emails first about learning more and showing more interest and building trust with their institution before they asked me to come to a campus visit.
Welcome to Mission of Missions. I'm your host, Jeremy Tiers. This is the show designed to help you grow, both professionally and personally, in the fast-paced world of higher education. Every other Tuesday, I sit down with senior leaders, new professionals, and difference makers from across higher ed and beyond, where we'll share tips and strategies related to challenging topics like student recruitment, leadership, customer service, enrollment marketing, and time management. So if you're looking for practical advice and conversations that actually move the needle, this show's for you. Grab your notepad or fire up your notes app, and let's get into it. Hey everybody, it's Jeremy Tiers, and this is episode 71 of the Mission Admissions podcast. Over the past few years, colleges and universities have increased the amount of text messages they send to prospective students, and many schools have also started texting parents and guardians. During the last admissions cycle, my good friend Laura Rudolph, a former director of enrollment comms, who's now the founder and CEO of Square One Consulting, did some secret shopping, signing up both as a student and parent at several institutions. And so I'm excited to talk through what you found. Laura, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Jeremy. Appreciate it.
Let's start by giving the audience some additional context. Laura, walk us through how many schools you signed up at, what stage of the process you signed up, and was it a mix of privates and publics? I mean, anything that you think would be helpful context.
So I secret shop every year. I have since I first came into higher ed enrollment. I just wanted to understand the language of admissions early in my career, and I've just continued to do this every year. Early it was for print, then it became for email. And so for this year, I thought I really need to look a little bit more at texting, particularly because it is such a big part of an admissions strategy today. It just, I like to keep a pulse on communication across different types of schools and regions. And so my battery phone took a bit of a hit for the team on this one this year, and I signed up for 26 institutions. I signed up, as you mentioned, for the parent and the student. And I had approximately, 10 private liberal arts colleges, 9 private colleges, and 7 public colleges. I tried to mix it up a little bit in the types of schools and the regions. So these are across the United States. It's not one particular region. For 14 of them, I signed up as a junior. For 12, I signed up as a senior. I also wanted to see if there was any significant difference between the junior and the senior year in particular in the types of messages that were sent. So I bravely gave out my phone number and was just curious to see what happened.
I'd love to just start with this. What surprised you most? I mean, and if there's multiple things, great. But when you looked back at everything once you were done, what really stood out?
Well, I was pleasantly surprised at how many institutions actually texted me, even if it was one time. So 20 of the 26 schools did end up sending me a text message, which was about 76, 77%. And I think that's likely higher than what it has been in the past. I think everyone in admissions knows that this is a communication channel that we need to be using more. It's incredibly effective. And so I think more are joining the text message bandwagon, which I think is a really positive for all institutions. So that's probably an improvement overall. But I think the biggest surprise to me is still a bit of the inconsistency that we're seeing. 6 institutions didn't text me at all. And those institutions, interestingly, I was a senior. And so I really had anticipated having fewer text messages as a junior than I did a senior, and that wasn't necessarily the case. And the approaches were a little bit all over the place. So we'll get into that probably here in a little bit. Another big surprise is the fact that I didn't get a single text message as a parent. If you look back in all kinds of data that's out there, I particularly think of Niche a few years ago. 68% of parents said that they wanted to get text messages from colleges. And so with them being so influential in the decision process, it's still a little surprising to me that they've been left out entirely. And then from a strategy perspective, I think there's still a little ways to go for us to start building our text messaging to start feeling like a relationship. A lot of them felt more like reminders, one-off text messages, and I think there's a lot of opportunity in conversation.
I'd be curious to know, do you feel like there's been somewhat of a shift just in the way that, like, again, texts are ultimately being written, or just kind of like the focus of a lot of texting from colleges the last couple of years?
I remember early on in the early 2010s when I was really working in education enrollment for the first time. And I remember a very similar experience to what you just described, which was there was a lot of hesitancy around texting students, much less texting parents, because there was this general sense that that was their personal space and we did not belong there. But like you said, I think over time, not only is it more common, I think, for institutions to do it, but I think just as a society, text messaging has become the primary mode of communication for a lot of people. And so I think there's also a willingness, even with brands. And, I'm a parent who wants a coupon code, right? So sign me up and send me a text message with my coupon code. I'll then put stop to unsubscribe, right? And we're used to doing that now. That is a commonality. And so I think that there's a willingness now to not only receive it, but I think then that's opened up institutions to feel more comfortable sending them. I think the hardest part is knowing how to integrate it into an overall strategy, especially when it is perhaps lying with the territory manager or the admissions counselor, when perhaps the overall marketing strategy is done by enrollment marketing or by your marketing office. And how do you integrate those two pieces together? And I think that is still seemingly a challenge based on what I've experienced. But I think there's some really promising examples that I have to share that are a little bit more personalized and segmented. But overall, I think that there's still some education and some training to be had.
Let's dig into that, because I know you do have a whole bunch of examples, and obviously the audience is listening and they're not going to be able to see the actual examples. But I mean, I encourage you to read anything you're comfortable reading. So let's dig into the good, the bad, I would say the missed opportunities. And let's just start with the good, Laura, because I think there are some things that schools are doing that is working well. And I absolutely want to share that with the audience.
I saw some really promising examples in the text messaging. I think a few of them felt genuinely personal, perhaps that the counselor really did send it out to just a handful of students. One in particular really caught my attention. It tied into my major interest, and then it linked me to a story from the college. So it was personalization, not just with my name, but it recognized that I was interested in something and that there was a new story that had recently come out. It was really an outcome story about an alum that connected with me because of my major interest. And I thought that was really interesting. It was very rare in the messages that I received, but it stood out to me because it was just a little bit more than a checking in or an application reminder. And I think that overall, students don't want more text necessarily. They just want better texts. And I think that this was one of the better texts that I received over time. I also think the tones of text messages are a little bit better than what I'd seen in the past. Shorter, friendly, written in a way that made me feel a little bit more like I was texting with the person. And those were the kind of messages that really stood out to me.
Yeah, it is interesting you hit on those things because, and I know you've got some other tips that you're going to be able to share for the audience here shortly. But what we see all the time in surveys, like I literally have a question now. I put together a survey of a school I'm flying out to tomorrow, public regional institution over, I think 18 to 20-ish% of students responded to the survey. And literally it's an open comment box question, one of the questions, which is, if colleges and universities want to convince you that this is not a bot sending you this text message, like what advice would you give them? Literally, that's the question. And the number of things that really go into this idea of, well, first of all, you have to use language that sounds like you're an actual human and not a robot. And then, oh, by the way, if you can give something that is relevant and relatable, just like the example you shared there, meaning you're not just texting me randomly out of the blue when you first meet me. You're learning some things after building a relationship with me through other means of communication, right? In person, emails, phone calls, whatever it might be. Then you actually take some of that information, connect it to something, put that in the text. That obviously feels way more genuine and authentic than just essentially a whole bunch of information, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I think that when we think about texting in general, and this is something that I've trained my past admissions counselors on a lot, which is, it's important to think about your own texting habits. Do you ever text a friend or a family member or a colleague with no expectation that they're going to respond? Probably not, because texting is just inherently conversational. So when you send a message to a student, you should be thinking about how to spark a reply or to ideally start a dialogue. Because if the only goal is to push information, or, an email or a landing page might be better for that. But I think the unique power of texting is its immediacy and its interactivity. And I think it's important to use that to your advantage.
What other examples, anything that you're comfortable sharing, did you think, hey, like that actually makes sense, whether it was a junior or a senior student getting it?
For juniors in particular, I did receive a couple of text messages about specific junior preview days, recognizing where they're at in the admissions process a little bit more, not just a blanket campus visit experience. So that was nice to have a couple. I will say I didn't feel like the segmentation was as high as where we are now with email. I think email has come a long way, but I think text messaging still has a little ways to go.
So many of these CRMs nowadays allow you to do all that segmentation. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I think the point you made earlier is so valuable for the audience in terms of like, where does all this fit in the overall comm flow? Mm-hmm. That is a super important conversation for anybody listening who obviously works in leadership on the enrollment management side to have. I know one of the things, Laura, that annoys a lot of students are a couple of things, right? Like they hate getting the exact same text multiple times, or having some version of like, hey, I'm just checking in, or reach out if you have any questions, right? Like those are just things that if you're doing that, I encourage you to stop, because it absolutely turns students off and it annoys them because it just feels generic and like it came from a bot, right? So like, what are some other mistakes that you saw a lot of where you're like, if I'm giving advice to schools and I'm you, like you need to stop doing these things?
So I call those sinkhole phrases, Jeremy, which is just letting you know, or reach out if you have questions, or I'm just checking in. They're polite, but I think they just shut the door instead of opening it. They just don't know what to do with that. I wouldn't know what to do with that if I got a text message either. I love sending text messages with a question at the end, because that's how you typically will spark dialogue. I think there's some unique ways that you can do that. So one text message that I think about in particular was from an institution. I'm going to redact, obviously, names, things like that. But it said, Laura, the admissions application is officially open. Apply this month to qualify for a free t-shirt. Learn more, link. And then it said abbreviation admissions, right? But for me, what I would do is I would flip that if I were an admissions counselor, and I would say, hi, Laura, it's Jeremy from college. Our app just opened and early applicants get a free t-shirt. Do you want me to send you the link? Because I think that the difference here is really subtle, but it's powerful. And if you end on a question, then they feel the need perhaps to respond to that, like you are waiting for their response. And so that naturally kind of helps keep the conversation going a little bit.
To your point, giving them that choice and asking that question before you just assume they want the link, mm-hmm. right? I think is such an important and powerful, and it's not hard to do, right? Yeah. Like that's the coolest part of all of this. These are small, subtle changes. And I'm sure if you're listening to this, you heard Laura's tone there, right? Which is just a little more relaxed and conversational. And I'll say it, I've said it before, but I know at least one person listening is thinking it. You are not less professional, even though you're in a professional role, if you talk again in a more relaxed tone when you send texts, when you send emails. It actually makes you more relatable and believable, which, right, your audience needs from you.
Absolutely. You want to be authentic, and that's what institutions need to be for students nowadays. Interestingly, too, outside of just, these sinkhole phrases and being more personable, being more conversational, I had a surprising amount of text messages where institutions did not identify themselves. And a majority, you have to think from the student perspective on this, where they're receiving a random 10-digit phone number text. no name, no school, no context. And if I'm a student who has inquired at 26 schools, which hopefully not a ton of students do that, but they're probably anywhere from 12 to 15 is more likely. I received one that said, "Don't miss our final mascot preview day." The problem was the mascot was, and I can say this, a dog. And there are 43 colleges that use bulldogs as their mascot. So I kind of like need a decoder ring to figure out who this was that was sending me a text message. And a lot of them not only were using mascots instead of the institution name, but they would also use abbreviations. And abbreviations are also kind of tricky because there are institutions that have the same abbreviations. And then very few actually said the counselor's name. Like, hey, it's Laura from college. I didn't receive but maybe 4 text messages the whole year that had that in there. And I think that's really important because I want to know the person that I'm texting back. And if they're just blanket sending and I don't have a name to reference, to me, that is just a blatant, obvious mass text message.
The point that you just made is literally something students bring up a lot, which is like, if you're not going to identify yourself and you're not going to attach this like to an actual person, and you're just going to say generic, like college name, admissions team or admission staff or something like that, 100% it's going to feel less personal and more like a bot. I mean, I think even when I text people where I'm like, okay, even if they gave me their number, but I've never texted them before, I'm not just going to go into dialogue right away with them. I'm going to be like, "Hi, Laura, it's Jeremy Tears," right? And I don't need to say where I'm from because I know at that point, you know who Jeremy Tears is, but I'm absolutely going to identify myself. And again, these are small, little subtle changes,
Very small.
but they're changes that are super important if, again, you expect students to truly believe it's not coming from a bot. And that's the battle I feel like, Laura, colleges are just going to continue to battle more and more as AI continues to grow and develop too, just because of how much, again, spam we all get each day in terms of text. So,
yeah, I mean, humanizing messages is going to be continually the most difficult and thing to do moving forward, whether it's email or it's text messages or whatever it might be. When we were talking about, in particularly, strategy over text messages, I think that's going to, integrating it into the larger communication plan is still going to be also, I think, challenging for some. A good text message is not just about what you say, it's about how it fits into that bigger picture of your outreach. And I will say too often, texts were treated as one-off blasts just across the board. The student experience you have to think about is on a single continuous conversation. So without a strategy for timing or sequencing, context, even these really well written text messages can kind of miss the mark because you're not thinking about how it's integrating into the other pieces that they're receiving at the time. And there's a couple of things that, were noticeable, I think, outside of the big things. Asking for too much too soon, I guess I would say. So some of the first very initial text messages I received were asking me to come to campus for a visit. And that can feel a little sales driven, a little pushy right away, especially for seniors who had just started their, I had just inquired for the first time. I would hope that maybe I'd get a couple of text messages first or emails first about learning more and showing more interest and building trust with their institution before they asked me to come to a campus visit. I had one institution send me the same exact text message verbatim 4 times in a row, each one over the course of 4 months. And, I'm seeing that as a receiver of the message, 4 text messages in a row. So I can see them all together. To me, obvious bot, right? Like I'm not going to respond to that because there's not a lot of effort being put into that very clearly to me. And then just like using text for the wrong content. There were some that were very long text messages. And I think just knowing the right text as the right medium for certain content is really important. Quick, concise, actionable is really what text is for. But if you have detailed event descriptions or multi-paragraph announcements, text is probably not the best medium for that.
If they have to scroll, that is bad, unless
Yes.
they've literally asked you for something in a previous text that just takes you a little bit more to type out, right?
Absolutely. And I don't want to be remiss too. This is probably a pet peeve of mine. I know opting in is incredibly important. And I think that is a piece of the puzzle that people are also still trying to figure out, making sure that if you're purchasing names, that opt-in to text is included in that, making sure that if you're getting parent information that they are opting into text, students as well. What's interesting was the amount of people who were texting, and every single text I received, at the bottom it would say text stop to quit. And those stop disclaimers just immediately took me out of the text. I received 5 or 6 in a row, and every single one of them had the stop to quit. And there was just no illusion to me that this was a personal text message. And so I think including opt-out language is incredibly important. And I think doing it in the first message is appropriate. But as we talked earlier, I think as a society, we're used to this now. I think most people know that they can text stop to unsubscribe from something. I don't think that it's something that we never necessarily have to educate about, but I do think maybe in that first message, that's great. And then later on down the line, perhaps, you want to remind them again that they can if they haven't responded. But I don't think it's necessary to do it in every single text message that is sent, especially if you are actually sending it as, a person and you're wanting a response, because I just think it's going to take them out of ever responding to you.
How many schools used emojis? A lot? Not very many?
I was surprised by how few used emojis, in all honesty. I do think the ones that did, I think used them in pretty creative ways. One of them was for a summer preview day event. They would use a sunshine, the little things here and there. Some of them talked about coming to campus and they would have, an emoji for that. Thumbs up, right? Those kinds of things for the application opening, but really not as many emojis as I expected. There were no gifts that were sent to me at all, which is interesting. I maybe expected here or there. I know my admissions counselors at my last institution, if they were sending personal text messages, they would occasionally send those in their texts. But overall, very, very few, surprisingly.
I see a lot of, I'll say, quantitative and qualitative, mainly qualitative though, data when we ask, about emojis, for example, that says, all right, it's almost like you're trying too hard. And unfortunately, because there are literally so many emojis, fortunately are people out there who don't understand the meanings of some set emojis that they're using. And so students are like, you're not using them correctly either, which is kind of annoying and also funny, obviously, at the same time. I think, the overarching theme, if you're listening to Laura share everything today, is texting is super important. I mean, I'll be honest, Laura, my biggest fear with texting, if I'm advising colleges, is because schools have started doubling down on texting the last couple of years. If we're not careful in higher ed, we're going to be in the same spot in the next 24 months that we currently are in email, which is it is just so saturated and students are just going to tune so much of it out. And so I think those early texts, especially, right, when you first opt in that you talked about, those are so important because they set the tone for everything else the rest of the way, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think speaking to the importance of using this to build conversations, if I were in a leadership position right now, I would focus a little bit more on training my admissions team on what that looks like. I know that at my institution, I was the person who came in and would talk to our counseling team about what does a good text message look like, not just using it as, checking a box that I've kind of reached out to that student that day, but how can I use it to my advantage to get a student to take action, or, just to check in and see if I can get a glimpse into where they are at right now in their experience. I think one of the things you mentioned is anytime that they have taken an action with you, a campus visit, right? Obviously, text messages for campus visits are fantastic. If they're missing some items on their application and you need to reach out to them and say, hey, you're still missing a couple of items. Do you need any help completing? Those kind of things to help them push them over the edge.
The last thing I do on every episode, Laura, is fun, rapid fire. So I'm just going to give you a handful of things, and I want to get some quick feedback on each from you, okay?
Sounds good.
All right. You have degrees from both Eastern Kentucky and West Virginia, correct?
Correct.
Which football team is going to win more games this year?
Don't put me on the spot, Jeremy. You know what? I'm going to go with Eastern Kentucky University.
Okay. What's your favorite new podcast that you started listening to recently?
I am a true crime fan, and so I tend to listen to anything new that is a true crime podcast. As my family likes to say, oh, it just really lightens the mood. And I'm like, well, it keeps me interested.
If you had to eat one food every day for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Pizza. I could do it.
That's a hard one. I know
that's generic, but
No, hey, because you could do margarita pizza some days, and you could do
there's
a
so
meat
many
pizza.
options.
Yeah, that's just it. There's so many options, different sauces. I agree. Last book you read, what was it?
Oh, I actually have it over here. It's my dear friend. I am working with her right now on projects. She's also a wonderful consultant, Megan Grace. Generations in the World of Work. She wrote this with Corey C. Miller. And I've been referencing this lately while working with some leadership at different institutions to learn a little bit more about the Gen Zs that are coming into the workplaces as admissions counselors and kind of how to create a great environment for them.
Yeah, Megan does a great job.
She does.
I follow her on LinkedIn. Also a great follow there for people. Last one, your favorite ice cream flavor is?
I'm going to be very specific. It's a Grater's out of Cincinnati. They have a raspberry chocolate chip, and that is by far my favorite.
I mean, that does sound very good. As somebody
delicious.
who likes raspberry and chocolate chips. I am not familiar with the ice cream company, and I live next to Ohio, so I may have to check that one out. Laura, I just appreciate you being on and sharing that. If you're comfortable, I'm going to have you throw it out real quick because I know you well enough. We're good enough friends that you will share, I'm sure, more if people want to reach out about some of the secret shopping stuff you found out. Real quick, you want to give the audience your email address?
Yes. You can contact me at Laura@square1, SQUAREONEKY.com. You can also go to my website, square1ky.com, and I'm going to have a full breakdown of this entire secret shopping experience with some of these actual text messages so you can see them for yourself. I'll be including more there. I know it's hard to hear over podcasts sometimes, so you can read them for yourself and learn a little bit about what happened during the secret shopping this year.
Thanks for listening to Mission Admissions. This show is a proud member of the Enrollify Network, home to Higher Ed's the largest collection of podcasts. Enrollify is where higher ed goes to grow, so be sure to check out our other podcasts, webinars, video clips, blogs, and more. Visit enrollify.org and subscribe for all the latest details and content drops directly to your inbox. Enrollify is brought to you by Element 451, the digital workforce platform for higher ed. Learn more at element451.com.